He called her names, humiliated her, made the whole lunchroom laugh because of her skin. His voice echoed across the cafeteria, dripping with hate as he pointed, shouted, and tried to strip her of dignity in front of dozens of classmates. She sat there, frozen, shocked, her tray untouched, while whispers turned to chuckles and bold eyes stared, waiting to see her break. But in the very moment he thought he'd crushed her, something shifted. Someone hit record. And what happened next didn't just silence the room, it flipped the entire school on its head. Because the girl he tried to shame wasn't just strong, she was unforgettable. And by the time the truth spread, it wasn't her life that changed. It was his. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you've ever seen someone rise above hate, this story will stay with you. Zaria James had only been at Brookstone High for 3 weeks, but every day felt like walking through a maze where the walls whispered that she didn't belong. At 16, she carried herself with a quiet poise that turned heads without meaning to. Her hair was always neatly braided, her posture upright, and her eyes calm, observant, like she saw more than she ever said. A straight-A honors student and the daughter of a single mother who had just accepted a new job in town, Zaria had spent most of her life adapting to new places. She knew how to survive change, but surviving wasn't the same as belonging. The school was polished, the students polished even more. Suburban, safe, and structured, Brookstone High wore its reputation, like a badge. Inside its cafeteria, social lines were drawn sharper than the smell of bleach on the polished tile floors. Cliques sat in invisible territories. Every glance, every outfit, every whisper carried weight. On this particular day, Zaria found an empty seat near the middle of the room, not too close to the front where the loudest voices sat, but not in the far back where no one dared to speak. Her lunch tray was perfectly balanced, a folded sandwich, a side of greens, small cartons of fruit and juice. Everything in its place, untouched. She looked around, unsure where to rest her gaze. The noise of the cafeteria buzzed around her, full of inside jokes and conversations she wasn't a part of. Then came the shadow. Carter Blake, 17, everything. The school adored. Captain of the lacrosse team. Bright smile in the yearbook, son of a major donor. But beneath his popularity was a deep insecurity, the kind that flared up any time someone entered his space and didn't shrink. He spotted Zaria and saw not a new student, not a girl eating lunch, but a disruption. A mirror he didn't like. Carter had made a game out of picking targets who couldn't or wouldn't fight back. And Zaria, sitting alone at what he considered his table, became his next move. What Carter didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Zaria wasn't just surviving. She was watching, not with fear, but with patience. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. The cafeteria noise dulled to a low murmur as Carter Blake's voice cut through it like a blade. "Hey!" he barked, striding toward Zaria with a smirk stretched across his face. "You're at the wrong table." A few heads turned. Zaria didn't respond. She simply looked up, calm, unshaken, meeting his stare with the kind of quiet composure that only made him angrier. "This is where the lacrosse team eats," he sneered, gesturing to the space around her like it was sacred ground. "Not the lost and found." The chuckles started small, rippling from the group behind him. Zaria didn't flinch. Her tray remained untouched, her hands resting gently on either side of it. "What You don't talk? Carter continued, his tone louder now. Or do you only speak when someone snaps their fingers? The laughter got louder, and this time, a few kids in the back exchanged uneasy glances. Carter's voice took on a mocking lilt. Look at that hair. You come in here with your little braids thinking you can blend in. He leaned in closer, eyes narrowing. You're not fooling anyone. Zaria's expression shifted, but only slightly. Her jaw tightened, her gaze steady, unmoving. She wasn't giving him what he wanted. That made him furious. Say something, he snapped, now standing right over her. Or is silence your way of admitting you don't belong? His words hit like stone, not because they were clever, but because they were meant to hurt. Deeply. The room had gone silent except for the occasional snicker. Some students stared at their trays, avoiding the scene altogether. Others watched, unsure if it was okay to laugh. No one said a word to stop him. And then, with a single swift motion, Carter reached down, grabbed Zaria's bread roll off her tray, and threw it to the floor. Here, he shouted, voice echoing off the tiled walls. Why don't you start from the bottom, since that's where you belong? Zaria blinked slowly, her lips slightly parted, but she didn't speak. Her eyes glistened, not from defeat, but from restraint. She sat taller, her silence louder than his rage. In the back of the room, a hand moved. A phone, raised just high enough to catch the moment. Someone had hit record. The lens zoomed in, framing Carter's face twisted with arrogance, and Zaria. Still, centered, unwavering. She hadn't said a word. But the story was already being told. By sunset, the video had already spread beyond the walls of Brookstone High. It traveled through group chats, bounced across Instagram stories, and hit TikTok. Before nightfall, captioned with phrases like, "This is what racism looks like," and "She didn't say a word, but she said everything." The footage exploded across screens. Carter Blake's sneering face, his finger jabbing, the slur on his lips, it was all there. And then there was Zaria, frozen in quiet dignity, unmoved by his venom. The comments flooded in. Students from nearby schools, strangers from across the country, even teachers, people who had never met her, now calling her brave. But inside the school itself, the adults tried to contain it. Teachers whispered behind doors. The administration issued a vague statement about social media conduct, but the halls were alive with tension. Everyone had seen it. No one could unsee it. The next morning, Zaria walked into school with her head high. She wore the same black dress from the day before, as if to say she hadn't been broken. She moved past lockers, past whispers, past wide eyes and sudden hushes. She didn't need to announce herself. The internet had already done that for her. Carter stood near his usual crowd, arms crossed, trying to appear unaffected. He hadn't apologized, not in person, not online. He kept glancing toward her like he didn't know what to expect. By mid-morning, a surprise announcement rang over the loudspeaker. All students report to the auditorium immediately. Mandatory assembly. The student body filed in, murmurs swirling through the crowd like smoke. On stage stood Principal Daniels, flanked by faculty, looking more serious than usual. "What happened yesterday does not reflect who we are," she began. "But it has shown us that who we are is something we must now decide together." Then she turned to the side where Zaria sat in a chair, expression unreadable. "Zaria," She said gently into the mic, "We'd like to offer you the floor." Zaria hesitated. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't asked for it. Her first instinct was to stay seated, to avoid becoming a spectacle. But then she looked out at the crowd, at the quiet students who had looked away yesterday, at the ones who had chuckled but now looked ashamed, and at Carter, seated on the edge, trying to act like none of it mattered, yet visibly rattled. She stood. Walking slowly to the podium, Zaria adjusted the microphone with both hands. Her voice, when it came, was soft but unwavering. "You judged me by my silence," she began, her eyes scanning the rows of students. "But silence isn't weakness, it's restraint. It's watching someone try to tear you down and choosing not to go down with them." She paused. The auditorium was silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. Even the usual jokers sat still. "I've moved around a lot," she continued, "and I've learned that some people think power comes from being loud, from making others smaller, so they can feel bigger. But I don't want to be bigger than anyone. I just want to be seen. As enough." Her voice didn't waver once. "So if you saw that video and stayed quiet, I get it. I really do. But today, I'm not here to relive what happened. I'm here to tell you, it won't happen again. Not to me, not to anyone else sitting alone." There was a stillness in the room, then a sound. One student stood, then another, and another. One by one, students rose to their feet, not clapping, not cheering, just standing, in quiet solidarity. Even those who hadn't spoken up the day before were now rising, slowly, silently, forming a wall of support. Carter remained seated. For the first time, he didn't look untouchable. He looked small. And Zaria, standing alone at the microphone, wasn't alone anymore. By the end of that day, the video had become more than just a clip. It had become a statement. The student who recorded it still hadn't revealed their name, but their decision to post it publicly had sparked a firestorm none of them could have predicted. Major news outlets picked up the story, framing it with headlines like, "Teen silenced by racism speaks volumes without a word," and "High school confrontation goes viral, a lesson in dignity." Civil rights advocates began sharing it, praising Zaria's composure and demanding answers about how the school had allowed such behavior to flourish unchecked. Community groups got involved. Parents started calling the school board. A line had been crossed, and the world was watching. And then Carter's past began to surface. A former student anonymously shared that Carter had mocked her accent in freshman year. Another came forward with emails from a time he'd led a prank targeting a disabled classmate. The pattern was undeniable, and the protection was just as clear. Every report had been quietly buried, every complaint chalked up to boys being boys, or waved off by coaches who needed him on the field. For years, Carter had been shielded by status and last names. But this time, there were too many eyes, too much proof, and too much momentum. The school board called an emergency session. Within 48 hours, Carter Blake was suspended indefinitely pending full investigation. His future, once paved and privileged, was now uncertain. Meanwhile, Zaria's world shifted too, but in a quieter way. In the days that followed the assembly, students she barely knew began to stop her in the halls, not with pity, but with respect. One morning, she arrived to find a note slipped into her locker. "You made us all braver." That same week, she was nominated, unanimously, for the upcoming student council elections. She hadn't asked. She hadn't even considered running. But her classmates had seen something in her they couldn't ignore anymore. Integrity, courage, and the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. When asked during a lunchtime interview by the school paper how she felt, Zarya gave a soft shrug, her tone even. "I didn't come here to be a voice," she said. "I came here to learn, but if I have to be one, I won't whisper." There was no revenge in her eyes, no satisfaction in Carter's downfall, just a quiet promise that her silence had never meant absence. It meant she was gathering something stronger than noise. She was gathering truth, and now it had found its moment. The days that followed felt like a new beginning, not just for Zarya, but for the entire school. The quiet girl who had once sat alone in the cafeteria was no longer just a student. They now saw her as a symbol, not of victimhood, but of strength, not of silence, but of substance. But Zarya had never sought the spotlight, and she certainly hadn't wanted to become a symbol. What she wanted was simple: fairness, safety, and the chance for every student, regardless of color or background, to sit down at lunch without fearing who would walk by or what names they might be called. Instead of distancing herself from the school that had once failed her, Zarya leaned in. She partnered with a handful of students who had quietly reached out after the incident, some with apologies, others with gratitude, but all with one thing in common: a willingness to do better. Together, they formed an official student coalition with a single mission: to change the culture that had allowed Carter's actions to go unchecked for so long. They named it The Stand, inspired by the moment so many classmates had risen to their feet during Zarya's speech. It wasn't a protest, it was a promise. Under Zarya's lead, The Stand began working with teachers, counselors, and even parents. They designed peer-led workshops on racial sensitivity and bullying prevention. They started lunchtime dialogue circles where students from different grades and backgrounds could actually talk, not about assignments or sports, but about what it felt like to walk these halls in their own skin. Posters began appearing on bulletin boards. "We don't shout people down, we lift them up. Strength isn't loud, it's real." Perhaps the most lasting change came in the form of policy. Zarya helped write the school's first official Equity and Respect Code, a set of values and consequences that held both students and staff accountable for how they treated one another. It was detailed, clear, and unapologetically firm. No longer would excuses like "kids will be kids" or "they didn't mean it" be used to bury harmful behavior. This time, silence wouldn't be protection for the privileged. It would be a reminder of what happens when people don't speak up. And when it came time to decide where the very first framed copy of the new code would hang, Zarya's voice didn't waver. The cafeteria. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The same place where she had been insulted, mocked, and dehumanized would now stand as the beating heart of the school's values. The plaque was installed on a smooth cream wall near the center of the room, above the table where it had all begun. Beneath it, the cafeteria was transformed, not into a perfect place, but into a better one. Students sat more freely. Conversations changed. The laughter was no longer sharp or cruel. It felt lighter now, more human. Then came Carter's return. After weeks of disciplinary review, counseling sessions, and a wave of public fallout, Carter Blake requested to speak. No one forced him. No teacher prepared a script. The auditorium was full once more. The same stage where Zaria had quietly changed everything, now waiting for a different kind of reckoning. Carter walked out slowly, shoulders heavy, face stripped of arrogance. He no longer carried the easy swagger of a boy who had always been protected. "I came up here because I need to say something," he began, voice cracked but audible. "What I did, what I said, it wasn't just a mistake, it was a choice, a cruel one, and I'm sorry." He looked up, scanning the crowd, and for the first time his eyes were wet. "I thought silence was weakness. But when I watched that video, watched her just sit there while I tore into her, I realized how wrong I was. I had all the noise, and none of the strength." He turned toward Zaria, who sat near the front. "You didn't deserve any of it, and I can't undo what I did. But I'm here, trying to learn, not for applause, just because it's time." There was no standing ovation, no performative claps, just a long, steady silence, one that wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was respectful, reflective. Zaria didn't smile. She didn't nod. But she didn't turn away either. She simply watched, present but still centered, because she knew something now that Carter was only beginning to learn. Forgiveness isn't performance. It's patience. The next week, during lunch, Zaria walked into the cafeteria and made her way to the exact same table where it had all unfolded. But this time, she didn't sit alone. A group of students moved aside to make room. Her seat, once a symbol of isolation, now sat at the center of something bigger. Friends across the table, students beside her, different races, different backgrounds, all quietly aware of the space they were creating together. The plaque glinted above her in the sunlight, and beneath it, Zaria ate her lunch. Not hurried, not guarded, just present. Whole. She didn't fight Carter's fire with fire. She hadn't yelled, cursed, or retaliated. She had instead built something no slur could burn. Her strength had been still. Her victory had been quiet. But its echo was undeniable. Because real strength doesn't shout. It stands. And when it stands in truth, it teaches others how to rise. Zaria moved through the lunchroom like she always had, quietly, without needing to be noticed. But this time, something had changed. As she passed tables and clusters of students, heads lifted. Not in fear, not in discomfort, but in respect. Some nodded gently, others offered small smiles. No one called attention to her. No one needed to. It was in their eyes, the way they saw her now, not as the girl who had been mocked, but as the one who had faced hate and never once let it define her. She walked past the same floor where her tray had once been knocked over, past the same table where laughter had once tried to drown her out. And yet, it was her silence that still echoed loudest. They tried to silence her with shame. Instead, she taught them what dignity sounds like. Have you ever seen hate defeated? Not with rage, but with truth. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's ever felt targeted, invisible, or alone. Let them know their silence doesn't mean surrender, and their presence is already powerful. And follow for more stories of courage, justice, and voices that rise above.